The mining station on Kepler 442b looked like a metal wound against the orange desert landscape. Dust storms had carved strange patterns into its outer walls over the years, and the solar collectors bore scars from countless sand-blasting winds that swept across the barren planet every few months. Princess Zara stepped off her royal transport ship and felt the dry heat hit her face immediately. Her purple skin gleamed under the alien sun, and her 4 arms moved gracefully as she adjusted her ceremonial robes. The Veltharian Empire had sent her here for what they called a routine diplomatic inspection, but Zara knew better. They wanted her to check if the humans were following the mining treaties properly. Captain Lisa Chen waited at the landing platform with a small group of human officers. She saluted as Zara approached, and her face showed the nervous respect that most humans displayed around Veltharian royalty. The peace treaty between their species was only 3 years old, and everyone still walked on thin ice when dealing with each other. "Welcome to Mining Station Kepler 7, Your Highness," Captain Chen said stiffly. "We have prepared quarters for you in the diplomatic section and arranged tours of our operations." Zara nodded politely, but her golden eyes were already scanning the station. She could see human workers moving between the buildings and the massive mining equipment that dug precious minerals from the planet's crust. Everything looked efficient and organized, which was typical of human operations. They might be considered a younger species, but they certainly knew how to get work done. The first 2 days of her visit went exactly as expected. Captain Chen showed her the administrative offices where humans tracked their mining quotas and maintained records of everything they extracted. The medical bay was clean and well-equipped, and the living quarters for the workers seemed comfortable enough. Zara took notes on her portable data pad and asked the standard questions about safety protocols and environmental protection, but on the 3rd day something changed. While touring the lower maintenance levels, Zara heard the sound of someone singing. The voice was rough but pleasant, and the song was something she had never heard before. Captain Chen looked embarrassed and tried to steer her away from the sound, but Zara's curiosity was stronger than protocol. She followed the singing voice down a corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits until she found its source. A human. Male was lying on his back under a massive piece of mining equipment with only his legs visible. Tools were scattered around him, and his work clothes were stained with grease and metal dust. He was completely absorbed in whatever repair he was doing. "Excuse me?" Zara said softly. The singing stopped immediately, and the man slid out from under the machine. He was maybe 35 years old, with dark hair and brown eyes that held an easy confidence. His face was smudged with dirt, but his smile was genuine as he looked up at her. Unlike every other human she had met on the station, he did not immediately bow or show signs of nervousness. "Oh, hey there," he said casually while wiping his hands on a rag. "You must be the princess everyone's been talking about. I'm Jake Martinez, Captain." Chen appeared behind Zara, looking mortified. "Your Highness, this is just one of our maintenance workers. We should continue with the scheduled tour." But Zara found herself intrigued by Jake's relaxed manner. "What were you working on?" she asked him directly. Jake's face lit up with enthusiasm. "This old plasma cutter has been giving us trouble for weeks. The focusing crystal keeps going out of alignment, and nobody could figure out why. Turns out the housing was warped from heat stress. Nothing a little creative engineering couldn't fix, though." He gestured to the machine with obvious pride in his work. Zara moved closer to examine it, and was surprised when Jake began explaining the technical details without any of the careful formality other humans used with her. He talked about resonance frequencies and energy efficiency, as if she were just another engineer rather than alien royalty. "The human approach is always so interesting," Zara commented. "Your people find solutions that our technicians would never consider." "Well, we don't have all the fancy equipment your empire has," Jake replied with a grin. "So we get creative. Sometimes the simple fix is the best fix." Captain Chen was clearly uncomfortable with the informal conversation, but Zara waved her concerns away. She spent the next hour listening to Jake explain various pieces of equipment and found his perspective fascinating. He showed her how humans had modified standard mining tools to work better in the planet's harsh environment and pointed out improvements they had made to increase efficiency. When Jake mentioned that he used to travel a lot before settling down to fix things, Zara asked about his background. His expression became slightly distant, and he shrugged casually. Just moved around a lot when I was younger. Saw different places and different ways of doing things. Eventually decided I preferred building and fixing stuff instead of... He paused for a moment. Instead of other kinds of work. There's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again. Over the following days, Zara found herself returning to the maintenance sections far more often than her official schedule required. Jake always had time to show her something new, and his explanations helped her understand human engineering in ways that formal reports never could. He treated her like a person rather than a title, and seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts about the technology. The other maintenance workers gradually warmed up to her presence as well. Tony Rodriguez was a young man who specialized in atmospheric systems and had an endless supply of jokes that made even Zara laugh. Sam Parker was quieter but incredibly skilled with electronics and could make any broken device work again with patience and creativity. Old Pete Williams had been working in space longer than anyone and had stories about the early days of human expansion that fascinated Zara. Jake seemed to be the unofficial leader of the group, though nobody had given him that title. The others looked to him when problems arose, and he had a way of keeping everyone calm during difficult repairs. When Zara asked about this, Jake just said that experience taught you how to stay focused when things went wrong. The trick is not to panic, he explained while working on a damaged air recycling unit. Most problems have solutions if you think them through step by step. Getting excited just makes you miss the obvious answer. Zara began to see humans differently through Jake's eyes. Her people had always viewed humans as useful but primitive, good at following instructions and working hard, but lacking the sophisticated culture of older civilizations. But Jake and his team showed her creativity and resourcefulness that impressed her greatly. When she mentioned this to Jake, he laughed and shook his head. We're not primitive, princess. We just do things differently than your people. Every species finds its own way to solve problems. Humans tend to be pretty good at adapting to whatever situation we find ourselves in. Captain Chen grew increasingly nervous as Zara's visit extended beyond the original schedule. She sent regular reports to both human and Veltharian authorities, but Zara insisted that her inspection required more time. The truth was that she was learning more about humanity from conversations with Jake than she had from years of diplomatic briefings. Jake never asked why she spent so much time in the maintenance areas, or why she seemed more interested in broken machines than diplomatic ceremonies. He simply accepted her presence and continued sharing his knowledge with the same easy confidence he showed in everything else he did as the days passed. Zara realized that Jake represented something she had never encountered before, a human who was completely comfortable with himself and his place in the universe. He took pride in his work without arrogance and treated everyone around him with the same respectful friendliness, regardless of their species or status. She began to understand that humanity's strength might not be in their technology or their military, but in their ability to adapt and find joy in simple accomplishments. Jake could spend hours fixing a broken tool and take as much satisfaction from that as Zara felt when she successfully completed major diplomatic negotiations. The mining station had seemed like just another human outpost when she arrived, but now it felt like a window into the true nature of humanity. And Jake Martinez, with his easy smile and capable hands, had become her guide to understanding a species that was far more complex than anyone in the Veltharian Empire had realized. 3 weeks had passed since Princess Zara first heard Jake singing in the maintenance bay, and her understanding of humans had changed completely. What started as casual curiosity had grown into genuine friendship, and she found herself looking forward to their daily conversations more than any formal diplomatic function. The change in routine had not gone unnoticed. Captain Chen filed increasingly concerned reports about the princess's extended stay and her unusual interest in maintenance operations. Earth Command responded with coded messages asking for detailed status updates, while Veltharian diplomatic channels buzzed with questions about the delay in Zara's inspection schedule. But Zara ignored the official pressure and continued spending her mornings in the lower levels of the station. Jake had started setting aside time each day to show her different aspects of the operation, and his enthusiasm for human engineering was infectious. Today he was explaining how the atmospheric processors worked to keep the station's air clean, despite the constant dust storms outside. "The trick is layered filtration," Jake said while pointing to a series of spinning cylinders. "Most people think you need one really good filter, but that just clogs up fast. Instead, we use 6 different stages that each catch different size particles." Zara watched the machinery work with fascination. The Veltharian approach would have been to use energy shields to keep dust out entirely, but the human method was more elegant in its simplicity. It used the planet's own atmospheric pressure to drive the cleaning process and required minimal power to maintain "your people always." "Surprise me with these solutions," she told Jake. "We would have solved this problem completely differently." "Different doesn't mean wrong," Jake replied with his usual easy smile. "Just means we think about problems from different angles. Your people have had thousands of years to perfect energy manipulation. We've had to get creative with mechanical solutions." Their conversation was interrupted by Tony Rodriguez, who came running over with a concerned expression. One of the main mining extractors had developed a serious vibration problem and normal. Operations were being shut down until it could be repaired. Jake listened to Tony's description of the symptoms and nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like a bearing alignment issue. Those big extractors put incredible stress on their support systems. We'll need to do a complete tear down to fix it properly." "That could take weeks," Tony said worriedly. "The production schedule will be completely shot." But Jake was already walking toward the equipment storage area. "Not if we're smart about it? Princess, want to see how humans handle a real engineering challenge?" Zara followed Jake and Tony to the massive mining extractor that dominated the station's main work area. The machine was easily 50 meters long and designed to bore deep into the planet's crust to reach valuable mineral deposits. Even shut down, it was an impressive sight that demonstrated human industrial capability. Jake spent an hour crawling over every part of the extractor while making notes on a portable tablet. He tested connections and listened to different components with the focused attention of someone who truly understood mechanical systems. Finally, he called Tony and Sam Parker over for a consultation. "The problem is worse than I thought," Jake said seriously. 3 of the main support bearings are completely shot and the resonance frequency is all wrong. If we try to run it like this, the whole assembly could tear itself apart." Sam whistled softly. "That's going to be expensive to fix. New bearings for something this size have to be special ordered from Earth. Could take months to get parts out here." But Jake was already shaking his head. "We don't need new bearings. We need to think like humans instead of like a parts catalog. Tony, remember that old transport ship that crashed near the southern mining site last year?" "The freighter with the blown engines?" Tony asked. "Yeah. We salvaged what we could from it, but most of the good stuff was already stripped." "Not the important stuff," Jake said with growing excitement. "That ship had industrial-grade stabilizers for cargo handling. Same basic design as these bearings, just scaled for different loads. We can modify them to work." Over the next several days, Zara watched Jake coordinate a repair effort that would have impressed engineers from any species. He led a team of humans to the crashed freighter and supervised the careful removal of components that could be adapted for the mining extractor. The work required precise cutting and reshaping of metal parts using tools that were never designed for such modifications. What amazed Zara most was how Jake managed to keep everyone motivated and focused, despite the enormous challenge they faced. When Sam became frustrated with a particularly difficult modification, Jake would quietly show him a different approach. When Tony worried about whether their improvised solution would actually work, Jake would point out similar repairs they had successfully completed in the past. "The key is not to think about what we don't have," Jake explained to Zara during one of their evening conversations. "Instead, we focus on what we do have and how we can make it work. Humans have been solving problems with limited resources for our entire history." Zara began to understand that this attitude was fundamental to human nature. Where her people would have waited for proper replacement parts or redesigned the entire system, Jake's team was creating solutions from salvaged materials and creative thinking. They worked 12-hour days without complaint and seemed to genuinely enjoy the challenge. On the evening of the 5th day, Jake invited Zara to join the maintenance crew for their weekly poker game. The invitation surprised her since she had never played the human card game and wasn't sure if her presence would be welcome. But Jake assured her that the others had been curious about Veltharian culture and would enjoy teaching her their favorite pastime. The game took place in a small recreation room near the maintenance bays. Pete Williams had set up a circular table, with worn playing cards and small metal tokens that served as betting chips. When Zara arrived, she found Tony and Sam already seated and engaged in friendly conversation about the day's work. "Princess!" Tony called out cheerfully. "Jake says you want to learn how to play poker. Fair warning, Pete here will try to take all your money within the first hour." Pete Williams laughed and gestured for Zara to sit down. "Don't listen to Tony. I'm a perfect gentleman when it comes to cards. Now Jake, on the other hand..." He shook his head with mock seriousness. "That man has no mercy at the poker table." Zara found herself relaxing as the humans explained the basic rules of the game. The betting system was simple enough, but the strategy involved reading other players' behavior and managing calculated risks. As they played, she discovered that poker required many of the same skills she used in diplomatic negotiations. "The secret is not to show what you're thinking," Jake explained as he dealt a new hand. "But you also have to pay attention to what everyone else is doing. Sometimes a small gesture tells you more than the cards themselves." After several hands, Zara began to understand why humans enjoyed this game so much. It combined luck and skill in ways that kept everyone engaged, and the social aspect encouraged conversation and storytelling. Tony regaled them with tales of his engineering training, while Sam shared quiet observations about life on the mining station. Pete Williams proved to be an excellent teacher who patiently corrected Zara's mistakes without making her feel foolish. His stories about the early days of human space exploration fascinated her and provided insights into how her species had developed their resourceful nature. "Back then, we didn't have fancy equipment or detailed plans," Pete said while shuffling the cards. "We just had determination and the willingness to try things that might not work. Lost a lot of good people learning how to survive in space, but we figured it out eventually." As the evening progressed, Zara realized she was experiencing something she had never had before: genuine friendship with beings from another species. These humans accepted her not as alien royalty, but as someone who shared their interest in solving problems and understanding how things worked. Jake seemed to understand this without being told. He included her in conversations naturally and never made her feel like an outsider despite the obvious differences between their species. When she successfully bluffed Tony out of a large pot, Jake congratulated her with the same enthusiasm he would show for any friend's accomplishment. "You're getting dangerous at this game," he told her with a grin. "Pretty soon we'll have to start playing for real money instead of these worthless tokens." The evening ended with Zara having won several hands and gained a much deeper appreciation for human social customs. As they cleaned up the cards and tokens, she thanked everyone for including her in their weekly tradition. "You're welcome anytime, Princess," Pete said warmly. "Just remember that Jake deals from the bottom of the deck when he thinks nobody is watching." Jake protested his innocence, while everyone laughed, and Zara felt a warmth she had never experienced in formal diplomatic gatherings. These humans had accepted her as one of their own, and she was beginning to understand that friendship might be humanity's greatest strength. As she walked back to her quarters that night, Zara reflected on how much her perspective had changed since arriving at the HFY mining station. The humans she had met were not the primitive but useful servants her. The attack came at dawn when most of the mining station was still waking up for the morning shift. Zara was in her quarters reviewing notes from the previous day's conversations with Jake when the first explosions shook the building. Emergency. Alarms began wailing throughout the complex, and she could hear Captain Chen's voice over the communications system, ordering all personnel to emergency stations. Zara moved to her window and saw 3 Krex raider ships descending through the orange morning sky. The vessels were dark and angular, with the characteristic weapon ports that made Krex ships look like flying predators. She had seen similar ships in intelligence briefings, but never expected to encounter them at a peaceful mining operation. Krex were known throughout the galaxy as brutal raiders, who showed no mercy to any species they encountered. They had been responsible for countless attacks on shipping lanes and remote settlements over the past several decades. Most civilized governments had standing orders to destroy Krex ships on sight, but the mining station had only a small defensive. Force Captain Chen's voice came over the intercom again with increased urgency. All civilian personnel report to designated shelter areas immediately. Security teams deployed to defensive positions. This is not a drill. Zara grabbed her emergency kit and headed for the door, but stopped when she realized something important. The Krex ships were not attacking randomly. They were heading directly for the diplomatic quarter where she was housed. This was not a simple raid for supplies or equipment. They were here specifically for her. The realization sent ice through her veins. If the Krex captured a Veltharian princess, they could demand enormous ransoms or use her as leverage in their conflicts with civilized governments. The peace treaty between humans and Veltharians would mean nothing if she was taken by raiders, who respected no laws. She activated her personal communicator and tried to contact Captain Chen, but got only static in response. The Krex ships were using jamming equipment to block all communications, which meant the human defenders would have difficulty coordinating their response. Zara made her way through corridors filled with running humans who were trying to reach secure areas. She could hear weapon fire from outside and the distinctive whine of Krex energy weapons cutting through metal barriers. The human security forces were fighting back, but their lighter weapons were not designed to stop a major assault. When she reached the main corridor leading to the shelter areas, she found her path blocked by debris from an explosion. Smoke filled. The air and emergency lighting cast strange shadows on the walls. She would have to find another route to safety. As she backtracked toward an alternate corridor, she heard heavy footsteps approaching from behind. Zara turned and saw 3 Krex warriors in full battle armor moving methodically through the smoke. Each was nearly 2 meters tall, with the gray, scaly skin and red eyes that made their species so feared throughout the galaxy. The lead Krex spotted her immediately and spoke in the harsh, guttural language of his people. The others spread out to flank her position while activating weapons that glowed with deadly energy. Zara reached for her own sidearm but knew it would be useless against their advanced armor. She backed away slowly while trying to think of an escape route, but the Krex were moving to surround her. The leader raised his weapon and spoke again in accented standard. "Veltharian princess comes with us. No resistance and death will be quick." Zara had been trained in combat like all Veltharian. Royalty. But 3 Krex warriors were beyond her ability to handle alone. She continued backing away while looking for any possible advantage, but found none. The corridor was too narrow to maneuver effectively, and their weapons would cut through any cover she might find. The lead Krex was raising his weapon to fire when another voice spoke from behind them. "Hey guys, I think you took a wrong turn somewhere." All 3 Krex spun around to see Jake Martinez standing at the far end of the corridor. He was wearing his usual work clothes and appeared completely calm, despite facing 3 armed raiders. In his hand was what looked like a standard plasma cutter. From the maintenance shop, the Krex leader laughed harshly. "Human worker dies quickly. Then we take princess." But Jake did not seem worried by the threat. He was standing in a relaxed posture with the plasma cutter held casually at his side. When he spoke again, his voice had changed completely. Gone was the easy friendliness Zara knew so well. In its place was something cold and calculating. "Last chance to walk away," Jake said quietly. "I'd really prefer not to do this." The lead Krex raised his weapon to fire, but Jake was already moving. The transformation was so sudden and complete that Zara barely recognized the man she had been talking with just hours earlier. The casual mechanic disappeared and was replaced by someone who moved like liquid death. Jake's plasma cutter came up in a perfect arc that took the lead Krex across the chest. But this was clearly not a standard maintenance tool. The modified weapon cut through advanced battle armor like it was made of paper, and the Krex warrior fell without making a sound. The second Krex managed to get off one shot before Jake's blade took him across the throat. The energy blast missed Jake by centimeters and left a smoking hole in the wall behind him. The third warrior had time to raise his weapon before Jake's return stroke opened him from shoulder to hip. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds. 3 Krex warriors who could have slaughtered a dozen ordinary humans lay dead on the corridor floor. Jake stood among them, breathing slowly and checking the area with the tactical awareness of someone who had done this many times before. When he turned back to Zara, she saw something in his eyes that made her royal blood run cold. This was not the friendly mechanic who had taught her about human engineering. This was someone for whom violence had once been a profession and who carried the weight of many deaths. "Princess," he said quietly, "we need to move." Now. Jake led her through corridors she had never seen before, using routes that avoided the main areas where Krex raiders were fighting human security forces. He moved with complete confidence and seemed to know exactly where the enemy would be at any given moment. As they made their way through the station, Zara began to understand that Jake was not simply avoiding the raiders. He was coordinating the human defense with precision that made Captain Chen look like an amateur. He would pause at intersections to speak briefly with human fighters, and they would nod and move off to new positions with renewed purpose. "Third level is lost," one security officer reported breathlessly. "They broke through the main checkpoint and are heading for the command center." Jake listened calmly and then gave instructions that demonstrated tactical knowledge far beyond what any maintenance worker should possess. "Pull everyone back to the secondary positions and set up crossfire zones at junctions 7 and 12. Use the mining charges if you have to, but don't let them consolidate their position." The officer nodded and ran off to carry out the orders. Zara realized that Jake had somehow taken command of the defense without anyone questioning his authority. The human fighters looked to him for guidance and followed his instructions without hesitation. They reached a maintenance shaft that led to the lower levels, and Jake helped Zara climb down into the narrow space. As they moved through the cramped passage, she could hear fighting continuing above them. The modified plasma cutter in Jake's hand glowed softly in the darkness, and she realized it was far more advanced than anything in the station's regular equipment inventory. "Jake," she said quietly, "who are you really?" He was silent for a long moment as they navigated the maintenance tunnels. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she had never heard before. Someone who hoped he would never have to answer that question. He replied. They emerged from the tunnels near the communication center where Captain Chen was trying to coordinate the defense. The captain looked relieved to see Zara safe, but her expression changed when she saw Jake's weapon and the cold look in his eyes. "Martinez," she said carefully, "I need you to get the princess to the secure bunker while we hold them off." But Jake shook his head. "The bunker won't hold against Krex assault teams. They have breaching charges that will crack it open in minutes. We need to hit them before they can organize properly." "We don't have the firepower for a direct assault, Captain," Chen protested. "Our best bet is to hold defensive positions until help arrives." Jake looked at her with the patience of someone explaining something to a child. "Captain, help isn't coming. They're jamming all communications and the nearest patrol ship is 3 days away. If we don't stop them here, they'll take what they came for and be gone before anyone knows what happened." The truth of his words settled over the room like a cold blanket. The humans were alone against a superior force, with no hope of outside assistance. Their only chance was to fight back with everything they had. Jake checked his weapon and looked around the room at the assembled human defenders. His expression was calm, but Zara could see the terrible resolve building behind his eyes. "I'll take point," he said simply. "The rest of you follow my lead and do exactly what I tell you. We're going to show these raiders why attacking humans was a mistake." As Jake prepared to lead the counterattack, Zara finally understood that everything she thought she knew about him had been wrong. The gentle. Jake moved through the station corridors like a force of nature that had been unleashed after years of careful restraint. The casual mechanic who had laughed at poker games and explained mining equipment was gone completely. In his place was something that made even the human security forces step back in wary respect. Zara followed at a distance as Jake led the counterattack against the Krex raiders. She watched him flow from shadow to shadow, with movements so precise they seemed choreographed. The modified plasma cutter in his hands was clearly military hardware disguised as a maintenance tool, and he wielded it with the skill of someone who had used similar weapons for years. The first group of Krex they encountered was trying to breach the station's main computer core. 4 raiders in full battle armor were using heavy cutting tools to slice through the reinforced door, while a 5th stood guard. They were so focused on their task that they never saw Jake approaching from above. He dropped from an overhead maintenance shaft directly onto the guard's back. The Krex warrior went down silently with Jake's blade between his shoulder blades. Before the others could react, Jake was already moving to his next target. The second Krex turned just in time to see death coming for him. Jake's weapon took him across the chest in a stroke so clean it barely registered before the raider collapsed. The third warrior managed to raise his rifle, but Jake was inside his guard before he could fire. A quick thrust to the throat ended that threat permanently. The remaining 2 Krex finally understood what they were facing. These were not ordinary human security forces, but something far more dangerous. They moved to flank Jake, but he anticipated their tactics perfectly and used their own positioning against them. Jake rolled behind a support pillar as energy blasts scorched the air where he had been standing. When he emerged a second later, his blade found the gap in the 4th raider's armor with surgical precision. The last Krex managed to get off 3 shots before Jake's return stroke opened him from hip to shoulder. 5 Krex warriors who could have massacred an entire platoon of regular troops lay dead in the corridor. Jake stood among the bodies checking his weapon with the calm efficiency of someone performing routine maintenance. There was no excitement or satisfaction in his expression, only the focused attention of a professional completing necessary work. Captain Chen and her security team arrived moments later and stopped short when they saw the carnage. The Krex raiders had been cut down with a precision that spoke of extensive combat experience and advanced training. Jake's modified plasma cutter was clearly not standard mining equipment. Martinez, Captain Chen said carefully. "I think we need to talk." But Jake was already moving toward the next objective. "Later, Captain. Right now we have about 15 more raiders between us and clearing this station. Stay behind me and try to keep up." As they moved through the station, Jake continued to demonstrate tactical knowledge that stunned everyone who witnessed it. He knew exactly where the Krex would position their forces and how they would respond to different threats. When human defenders reported enemy movements, Jake would nod and adjust his plans accordingly. "They're trying to create a kill zone near the main intersection," reported Tony Rodriguez over the radio. "Got heavy weapons set up to control all the approach routes." Jake listened to the report and smiled grimly. "Standard Krex tactics. They always use the same playbook. Sam, can you access the environmental controls from your position?" Sam Parker's voice came back over the radio. "Yeah, I'm right next to a control panel. What do you need?" "Cut the lights in sections 12 through 15, and then cycle the atmospheric pressure." Make it look like we're trying to flush them out with gas. They'll relocate to higher ground automatically. Zara watched in fascination as Jake manipulated the Krex raiders using their own tactical doctrine against them. Within minutes, the enemy forces had repositioned exactly where he wanted them. The kill zone they had prepared became a trap for themselves. Jake led a flanking attack that caught the Krex completely off guard. His team of human defenders moved with coordination that spoke of careful planning and extensive training. But it was Jake himself who made the difference in every encounter. The modified plasma cutter in his hands cut through Krex battle armor, like it was designed specifically for that purpose. Every stroke was economical and precise, with no wasted motion or excess violence. Jake took no apparent pleasure in the killing, but approached each enemy with the same methodical efficiency. He brought to repairing mining equipment. What impressed Zara most was how Jake tried to minimize casualties, even among his enemies. When two young Krex raiders threw down their weapons and surrendered, Jake ordered them secured rather than executed. He showed mercy when possible, but never hesitated to kill when necessary. Surrender is not weakness, he explained to one of the human security officers who questioned the decision. Dead enemies can't provide intelligence about future attacks. Besides, killing someone who has given up is not what we do. The statement revealed something important about Jake's character. Despite his obvious skill at violence, he retained moral principles that guided his actions. The casual mechanic's essential decency was still there beneath the lethal competence. As they cleared the last group of Krex raiders from the station, Zara began to understand the true scope of Jake's abilities. He had coordinated a defense that should have been impossible with the limited resources available. 15 heavily armed Krex warriors who had expected easy prey had been systematically hunted down and eliminated. The final confrontation took place in the station's main cargo bay, where the remaining Krex had made their last stand. Jake approached the sealed entrance with the same careful attention he brought to every tactical situation. 3 left inside, he said after listening at the door for several minutes. They're positioned to cover both entrances, and they have at least one heavy weapon. Standard assault won't work without significant casualties. Captain Chen looked at the sealed doorway with concern. Maybe we should wait them out. Eventually they'll have to come out or surrender. But Jake shook his head. Krex don't surrender when they're cornered. They'll fight to the death and try to take as many of us with them as possible. Plus, they might have explosives that could damage critical station systems. He studied the cargo bay layout on a portable display and began working out a solution that would minimize risk to the human defenders. Zara watched him plan the final assault with the same methodical approach he used for complex engineering problems. I'll go in first and draw their fire, Jake said calmly. Once they commit to engaging me, the rest of you can flank them from the secondary entrance. That's suicide, Captain Chen protested. Those heavy weapons will cut you to pieces the moment you step through that door. Jake looked at her with the patient expression of someone who had survived many similar situations. Captain, I've been doing this longer than you might think. Trust me to know what I can handle. Before anyone could stop him, Jake activated the door controls and stepped into the cargo bay. Immediately, the space erupted with energy weapon fire as the 3 remaining Krex opened up with everything they had. The air filled with deadly light as blast after blast scorched the air where Jake had been standing, but Jake was no longer where the Krex expected him to be. He moved through the weapons fire like he could see the future and knew exactly where each shot would go. The heavy plasma cannon that should have vaporized him missed by centimeters as Jake rolled behind a cargo container. The Krex adjusted their aim and concentrated fire on Jake's position, but he was already moving again. The modified plasma cutter in his hand came up and took the heavy weapons operator across the chest. The massive cannon fell silent as its user collapsed. The second Krex rushed Jake's position, but found himself facing someone who moved like violence. Incarnate. Jake's blade opened him from throat to sternum in a single stroke that was almost too fast to follow. The last raider managed to get off 2 shots before Jake. The silence in the maintenance bay stretched between them like a chasm that could not be crossed. Zara watched Jake's hands as he performed unnecessary adjustments to his weapon and realized that even these simple motions carried the precise control of someone trained for violence. Everything about him made sense now in a way that was both illuminating and terrifying. "Tell me about Centauri," she said quietly. Jake's hands stopped moving, and his shoulders tensed as if preparing for a physical blow. For a moment, Zara thought he would refuse to answer, but then he began speaking in a voice that carried the weight of memories he had tried to bury. Centauri was a human colony world with about 50,000 civilians. Farmers mostly, and some light industry. Nothing strategic or militarily important, just people trying to build something better for their families. The Kreks hit it 3 years ago during what was supposed to be a ceasefire. Zara had read the intelligence reports about Centauri, but they had been clinical summaries that focused on strategic implications rather than human cost. She had never heard the story from someone who was actually there. "They didn't just attack the colony," Jake continued. "They methodically executed every human they found. Men, women, children, elderly people who couldn't even walk. The Kreks turned it into a demonstration of what happened to species that resisted their expansion." Jake's voice remained steady, but Zara could see the pain in his eyes as he relived events that had shaped the rest of his life. "By the time we got word of the attack, it was too late to save anyone. 50,000 people were dead and the Kreks fleet was already moving to their next target." "What did you do?" Zara asked, though she was not sure she wanted to know the answer. "I did what I was trained to do," Jake said simply. "I hunted them down and made sure they could never do it again. The Kreks fleet had 47 ships, including 3 heavy cruisers that they thought made them untouchable. It took me 6 months to find them all." The implications of what Jake was saying slowly sank in. A single human had tracked down and destroyed an entire Kreks fleet in revenge for the massacre at Centauri. The stories she had heard about Ghost Martinez were not exaggerated propaganda, but simple statements of fact. "How?" she whispered. Jake stood up and walked to the small window that looked out over the mining station. In the distance, the lights of human settlements dotted the landscape like stars against the alien darkness. "The thing about Kreks tactics is that they're predictable," he said. "They always follow the same patterns because their rigid military hierarchy doesn't allow for innovation. Once you understand how they think, you can anticipate where they'll be and what they'll do." He turned back to face Zara, and she saw something in his expression that made her understand why the Kreks had put a bounty on his head. This was not just a skilled soldier, but someone who had become the personification of human vengeance. "I started with their supply ships and worked my way up the chain. Each target gave me intelligence about the next one until I had mapped their entire operation. The Kreks never expected a single human to come after them, so their security was designed for fleet actions, not individual infiltration. Jake's description was matter of fact, but Zara could imagine the months of careful planning and deadly execution that had gone into his campaign. The gentle mechanic who had taught her about mining equipment had once been humanity's most effective weapon against an enemy that showed no mercy. The final engagement was at their main base near the Vega system, Jake continued. 3 heavy cruisers and their entire command structure in one location. They thought they were safe behind energy shields and automated defenses that could stop a fleet. But not one person, Zara said with growing understanding. Not one person who knew their weaknesses, Jake confirmed. I spent 2 weeks studying their defenses and finding ways to turn their own systems against them. When I finally moved, they never knew what hit them. The scope of what Jake had accomplished was staggering. A single human had destroyed a Kreks fleet that could have conquered entire star systems. But looking at him now, Zara could see that the victory had cost him as much as any defeat. After Centauri, the war ended pretty quickly, Jake said. Turns out the Kreks weren't as invincible as everyone thought. Other species started fighting back, and the Kreks empire began falling apart from internal conflicts. Within a year, they signed peace treaties with most of the major powers. And you disappeared, Zara said. Jake nodded slowly. I had done what needed to be done, but I didn't want to keep doing it. The military offered me promotions and command positions, but all I wanted was to find somewhere quiet where I could work with my hands instead of weapons. Zara began to understand why Jake had been so content working as a maintenance mechanic. After years of violence and destruction, he had found peace in simple tasks that created rather than destroyed. The mining station had given him a chance to be useful without being deadly. But now that's over, she said sadly. Maybe, Jake replied. Captain Chen has probably already filed reports about what happened here. By tomorrow, Earth Command will know that Ghost Martinez is alive and working at a mining station on the frontier. They'll want me back for briefings and consultations, and probably assignments that require my particular skills. The weight of inevitability settled over both of them. Jake's peaceful life at the mining station was ending whether he wanted it to or not. The galaxy was not a place where someone with his abilities could remain hidden forever. What will you do? Zara asked. Jake walked back to his workbench and began, putting his tools away with the methodical precision that characterized everything he did. I don't know, Princess. For 3 years I've been able to pretend that part of my life was over. Now I have to figure out what comes next. Zara watched him work and realized that her own life was about to change as well. Her extended stay at the mining station had given her insights into humanity that would fundamentally alter how the Veltharian Empire viewed their human allies. Jake, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. What I've learned here changes everything about how my people see humans. You're not the primitive but useful species we thought you were. Jake looked up from his tools with a curious expression. What do you mean? I mean that humans like you exist throughout the galaxy, Zara said. Thousands of warriors who chose to put down their weapons when the fighting stopped. People with skills that could reshape the balance of power between species but who prefer to work quiet jobs where they can help others. The implications of what she was saying slowly became clear to Jake. You're going to report this to your government. I have to, Zara said, but not the way you think. I'm going to tell them that humanity's greatest strength isn't your technology or your numbers. It's your ability to choose mercy when you could easily choose violence. Jake stopped working and gave her his full attention. Princess, I'm not sure that's the message you want to send. If your empire thinks humans are more dangerous than they realized, it could make things worse for everyone. But Zara shook her head. You don't understand, Jake. What I saw today wasn't just deadly skill, it was restraint. You could have killed those surrendering Kreks, but you didn't. You minimized casualties even among your enemies. That's not the behavior of a primitive species. She stood up and moved closer to his workbench. The Veltharian Empire has always believed that superior technology and ancient wisdom made us natural leaders in galactic affairs. But what you've shown me is that true strength comes from knowing when not to use your power. Jake was quiet for a long moment as he considered her words. So what happens now? Do you go back to your empire and recommend changes in policy toward humans? I go back and tell them that we've been wrong about humanity from the beginning, Zara said firmly. That humans deserve to be treated as equals, not as useful servants. And that anyone who threatens human settlements should expect to face people like you. The conversation was interrupted by Captain Chen, who appeared in the doorway of the maintenance bay. Her expression was serious as she approached them with a portable communication device in her hand. Princess, I've been in contact with both our governments about today's events. Earth Command wants a full debriefing and the Veltharian diplomatic. Corps is sending a ship to collect you immediately. Zara felt a pang of loss at the thought of leaving the mining station. Her time here had been the most educational and personally meaningful experience of her diplomatic career. When do they arrive? She asked. Tomorrow morning, Captain Chen replied. Both ships should be here by dawn. Jake began packing his tools, with the resignation of someone who had always known this moment would come. Guess that settles it then, back to the real world for both of us. But Zara was not ready to accept that their friendship had to end simply because circumstances were changing. Jake, whatever happens next, you should know that meeting you changed how I see the galaxy. You've shown me that different species can understand each other as individuals rather than just as political entities. Jake looked up from his packing and smiled with some of the warmth she remembered from their early conversations. Princess, getting to know you changed things for me, too. For 3 years, I've been hiding from who I used to be. Maybe it's time to figure out how to be both people. At the same time,